right, everybody. Oh, shit. Is this on? Oh, it is. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming out here this evening. Really appreciate it. My name is Edward. I am president of Chicago Ornithological Society. I see some COS hats and other swag in the audience there. Shout out to you guys. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. I just wanted to do a little quick housekeeping here. First things first, if you guys do need to use the bathroom, feel free at any point to head out, get a drink of water, use the bathroom. Those are basically right back out where you came in through the museum, but then downstairs on that first floor, because we're downstairs to your left. So please feel free to come and go as you need to. We want everybody to make sure that they're taken care of here this evening. I also wanted to point out that we got set up a little bit late, but if you would like to help yourself to any COS or BirdLife International literature or bookmarks, they're on that table in the back there. So feel free to stop by and grab her 1 or 2 or 3 as we are milling about afterwards. But with that said, you didn't come here to listen to me talk. I just wanted to make sure that we give a very, very warm welcome to our special guest here tonight in Chicago for the very first time. And already getting some great warbler experiences here this afternoon, and we'll be seeing a lot more as the week progresses here. But I want to give a very warm welcome to Martin Harper, CEO of BirdLife International.
Great, thanks everybody, and thanks so much for coming out on this Monday night. The birding was great. Christina, thank you so much indeed. Jay, thank you very much indeed. And a huge thanks to the Peggy Notepark Museum for hosting us this evening, and of course the whole of the Chicago Ornithological Society, Edward and Chris, wherever he is, and of course Christina. So yeah, I'm Martin Harper. I work for BirdLife International. I'm here with my colleague Courtney Sakai, who's at the back, who actually is living in Chicago. I'm in Cambridge, UK, but it's my first time here. So what I thought I'd do tonight is I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction into BirdLife International's work. I'm going to talk about our world as it is. So I'm going to share some of the statistics about what's happening to our birds around the world. But I'm also going to talk about how we're responding to that, particularly as BirdLife, and I'm going to tell you 3 stories about what we're doing, particularly here in this hemisphere in the Americas. So, how many of you have heard of BirdLife International before this talk? Okay, so a smattering of people. So we were founded 104 years ago on the back of the successful campaign to outlaw the use of wild birds and feathers in the hat trade. So in the late 19th century, early 20th century, birds were being plundered from places like Colombia so they could be adorned on ladies' hats. And so the fashion houses of Paris and New York and London were basically being bombarded with loads of these dead birds. And essentially what happened was the Audubon Society here in the US, the RSPB, Royal Society of Protection of Birds in the UK, and partner organisations in the Netherlands and in France essentially mounted a global footprint campaign to ban the use of wild birds and feathers in the hat trade. And because they were doing pretty much the same thing, they thought, well, maybe, you know what, maybe we need to collaborate, because by combining forces we might be more effective. And we then, they founded this organisation called the International Council for Bird Preservation. A bit of a mouthful, and then for the first 70 years of its life it was very scientific, actually, even though it had its campaigning roots. And then in 1993 it was decided to create a different model of one national organisation per country, and very much focusing on NGOs doing what NGOs should do best. Yes, the science, but also the action and inspiring people to do more for nature. So this little slide tries to depict, in simple terms, why we exist, who we are, what we do, and how we work. So why we exist to try and give one voice to nature so birds and all life can thrive. We are the only global partnership focused solely on conserving birds and all life. And then we try and unite conservation action around the bird world, and we try and encourage that collective action to deliver real change for birds. And as you can see from this slide, this is our family. This is our 124 national organisations. And the thing you'll see there is that they're all got different logos. So we're not like a WWF with a single franchise. We want independent national organisations collaborating together. And I've ringed to bottom right because these are our 2 US partners. So rules always need exemptions. So we have this rule of one national partner per country, but actually we've got two here in the US, National Audubon Society and American Bird Conservation. And collectively, we have about 10 million supporters around the world. There's about 7,000 staff, and we spend a lot of money together on conservation. And these stats are going to be updated very, very soon. And that's the geographical footprint of where we work. So the areas in green is where we have a national partner. And I apologize if you're colorblind, red and green isn't great. But I should say that I lead the global team, which is made up of about 280 people of 60 nationalities, and we operate in 11 offices around the world. Those are the red dots here. And our job is to support all of the partners around the world. And I am based in Cambridge, UK.
If you didn't know where it was, it's back there. That's where I am.
And for much of my life, I spent focused very much on UK's footprint abroad, which was very much looking to the south, towards Africa, and then also looking to the east into Asia. So when I took over as chief executive 3 years ago, I was allowed to come and play in the Americas, which has been an absolute delight. So I said I would say a little bit about our world as it is. So there are 124 BirdLife partners and our global team together with a global authority on birds, and every 4 years we produce this publication called The State of World's Birds. And this one was taken from our centenary actually in 2022, and we're going to be updating this and presenting this at our next big meeting, which is taking place September this year. So the statistics are presenting are a little bit out of date, but I'm not allowed to reveal the new stats, so you're just going to have to put up with 4 years out of date stats. So most of you will know all of this, that wherever we've been monitoring birds around the world, we've seen a similar picture of an enormous collapse in abundance. And of course, here in North America, there's an incredible bit of research that was done by a whole cluster of organizations which suggested that there are now 2.9 billion fewer birds than when I was born in 1970. I just happen to be one of those people born when all the trend graphs start and just see all the declines from 1970. And on my continent, there's now 600 million fewer birds than in 1980. And collectively, although it says there that 49% of all bird populations are declining, the stat actually now is that 61% of all bird populations are declining. So we know we've got a big problem, but it's important for us to project this data to the world so they know what we're dealing with. And we're able to assess the extinction risk according to this categorization, which is established by the IUCN, the World Conservation Union, and we create this red list every few years, and we're able to report that 1 in 8 species are at risk of extinction and 1 in 5 of conservation concern. So none of this is particularly good news, and what this graph is showing is that actually the extinction risk of species is growing over time. It's a bit counterintuitive because the graph is going down, but essentially what the graph is saying is there are more species at risk of extinction over time. So as well as monitoring what's happening to the state of the world birds, we're also able to identify what the main pressures are, what are driving those declines. And this bubble diagram here essentially shows the relative significance of different threats to wild birds. So the size of the circle essentially relates to the number of species which that particular threat relates to. So you can see on the top left, at 11 o'clock, agriculture is the biggest driver of decline. And then you can see there's climate change, and there's deforestation, and invasive species. And so what that then helps us do is to work out, okay, we know birds are in trouble, but we also need to know why they're in trouble, because then we can then target efforts to try and improve their population. So why does all this matter? Why do we care? Well, you will know this, and is reported pretty much on a yearly basis. That the whole of humans' prosperity in our economy depends on a healthy natural environment. And there just so happens to be 3 publications, one from this radical organization called the World Economic Forum, which every year produces its risk assessment, what are the biggest risks to the world economy, and they produce this little top 10 list of drivers. And the ones here on the short-term drivers, they're essentially saying that in the next 2 years, the biggest issues are things like geopolitical conflict, no surprise there. And on the right-hand side, the long-term threats, the ones in green, I know you may not be able to see it that clearly, they effectively all relate to environmental issues. So the World Economic Forum is essentially saying that the biggest risk to the world economy over the next 10 years, extreme weather events caused by climate change, and also biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. The challenge, of course, though, is that pretty much every 2 years, the short-term concerns dominate people's attention, whereas those medium-term risks keep on being pushed back, pushed back, pushed back. And then the other reports I've listed here, one is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and they produced a new report again saying that biodiversity is absolutely integral to our economy. And then the middle one, which is actually from the UK government, and it's fascinating. This basically says, oh yes, the degradation of ecosystems is a risk to national security. But what was fascinating about this report is it only emerged thanks to a Freedom of Information request by one of my mates, because essentially it was being suppressed because the UK government didn't want that information in the public domain, because then they would say, well, what are you doing about this? So essentially each of these reports are saying the same thing, that the collapse in biodiversity and ecosystem degradation is undermining our own prosperity. And of course, it's not just about money, it's also about the fact that we depend, we are inspired by wildlife pretty much across all cultures, art, literature, poetry, music, fashion, all inspired by birds, and essentially birds make us better. So, given the fact that wild birds are in trouble, given the fact that we know the reasons for their decline, what are we doing about it? There's some good news here. So 4 years ago in Montreal, the world leaders came together and they agreed a plan to try and halt and reverse the declines of biodiversity by 2030. And there's some specific targets that many governments around the world, not the United States, have signed up to. And these are essentially all designed to make sure that our collective effort is to try and halt and reverse the declines. And BirdLife has a strategy which is designed specifically to make a contribution to that global endeavour. And that strategy is rooted around our two foundations of our science, Global Authority on Birds, our partners, 124 and 119 countries. And then essentially we try and do things that many other conservation organisations try and do. We try and recover threatened species, protect and restore key sites, and influence the systems which are causing the declines, but also to mobilise society to effect change. And we do that all through the lens of birds, because they're beautiful, because they're incredibly well monitored, and they essentially act as barometers for the rest of nature. So when birds are in trouble, it's likely that the rest of nature's in trouble as well. So I'm just going to talk to you about 3 conservation stories which are verging on successful. So these are hopefully going to give you a little bit of hope and optimism that we can turn things around. And I'm going to start by talking about the work that we do for flyways. So what are flyways? Essentially they are the routes that birds take in a very predictable way all around the world. And we've just been experiencing what happens when the birds are migrating and they decide to stop off next to Lake Michigan. And they all spend a little bit of time here before they head off going north. And we being humans, we can divide up the pattern of birds into these big 4 flyways of the world. And there on the right-hand side is your flyway. And more than that, because the science in the United States is just phenomenal, and there are some amazing organisations, you can then create some of these extraordinarily beautiful graphics showing the movement of birds all the way up and down this hemisphere. There's a whole migration endeavour which likes of Audubon and Cornell and BirdLife and other organisations all get involved in. And it essentially is a wonderful way of bringing to life migration. And as you can see, obviously because birds know no borders, in order to save those birds, you have to act wherever those birds go. And so, as you can see from the slide on the right-hand side, these depict all of the BirdLife partners in the Americas. So you can see there's the logos of Audubon and American Bird Conservancy in the US. And then you can then see a patchwork of NGOs, of BirdLife partners all around Americas. We've got a few gaps. We haven't got partners in the Guiana Shield. We're missing a few in Central America, but we've got pretty decent coverage. And that means if we develop a coherent plan to save the migratory birds across the whole of the flyway, we've got some organisations absolutely lined up to try and help do this. And what's been really interesting with National Audubon is they have essentially set their own strategy to try and make a contribution to this whole hemisphere. And I know that Audubon is fractured in all sorts of different ways across the United States, but they're also just trying to encourage all those bird organisations to make a contribution to that collective endeavour, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But I'm going to just quickly do a side, I'm going to go off into a side tributary into Asia. Because something happened in Asia which is also now benefiting the Americas. And I just want to share, all the footage is coming through, so actually you've got some nice video footage of wonderful birds. And this little story is all about the East Asian Australasian flyway. If you remember on the map of the flyways, it was the one pretty much in the middle. And arguably this is the most threatened flyway of the world because there's been incredible development right up to the coastal edge of large parts of Asia. And so what we've done is we have said, well, okay, how on earth are we going to try and protect the sites that these migratory birds need across the whole of that flyway? And what we've done is we've found an investment partner in the Asian development banks. This is one of the multilateral development banks that lend to those countries in the global south to try and do good. Now, often traditionally, multilateral development banks were all about human infrastructure. But the multilateral development banks have now made commitments to try and do more for nature and the climate. And we said to them, well, okay, we essentially have a regional challenge to try and protect a network of sites across each of this flyway. We know that these sites are incredibly important for people living around them. We know they're really important for climate mitigation. We know they're really important to help people adapt to changing climate. So why not join us and the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership to drive some of your lending power into this network? And they agreed, and they made a commitment, a very bold commitment, we're slightly regretting it because it's a bold commitment, of mobilising between 3 and 5 billion over the next 15 years to essentially do what's on this slide, which is to provide investment into 50 sites to try and protect and restore more than 2 million hectares to help over 200 species and obviously the 200 million people that live in and around those sites. So it's a really wild ambition that Asian Development Bank has set, and we are encouraging them to go as far and as fast as they can. And we worked, don't worry about the slides, what I'm trying to show here is that we've been working with each of the governments in 11 countries to identify the sites that they want, arguably, to attract the investment from the Asian Development Bank. And we're up to about 50 or so, and for each of those sites, we've drafted investment strategies to say to the governments, attract the investment from the banks, and then you'll be able to do great things for birds and for people. And we've already seen some examples of this. So this is in China. It's a place called South Dongting Lake. It's a really important site for species like letter white-fronted goose. And it's also it's an enormous lake, about 50,000 hectares, about 750,000 people live there. But essentially the economy around that lake was killing that lake. And it's causing real problems, not just for the people and their livelihoods, but also in terms of the wildlife that depend on it. And so they have now mobilised a loan of about 308 million to try and influence the farming practices, the development around the lake, but also to get rid of some of the non-native invasive species around the lake. It's just one example, but it's big money, and it's hopefully going to provide a lasting future for this site. And if we can do the same for the network of sites across Southeast Asia, then we've got a chance for migratory birds to have a future. So, having piloted that in East Asia, Australasia, we've also then catalysed similar partnerships in the Americas with the Development Bank for Latin America called CAF, and also with Audubon. And then we've also, just last October, signed an agreement with the World Bank to try and do the same for the Africa-Eurasian Flyway. And we're hoping that we're able to get a partnership with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank for Central Asia. So these are big partnerships. They're not straightforward conversations because these multilateral development banks, they're tough institutions, culturally difficult sometimes to work with. But we are trying to essentially change the culture of the banks so they do more for nature. And the Americas Flyway Initiative, again, very, very similar to the one with CAF, mobilising billions of finance, supporting 30 projects, and also mainstreaming nature into human infrastructure. So, we're in a city of bird collision. I've just been invited to go and do a bit of bird collision monitoring tomorrow. I'm feeling a bit funny about that. I'm not sure we'll do it, but I think we'll do it. But just so happens that CAF has designed its new headquarters in Panama, and is basically using the best in class in terms of design to prevent bird strike, and also design the building with birds in mind. So there's some of the human infrastructure they're producing, and of course linear infrastructure and fixed point infrastructure for energy is a huge problem for birds, and we're trying to influence the way in which they are supporting countries get a rollout of electricity. Take 10 years, and if you are a Canada warbler and you depend on the forests of the Andes being in good order and the passage all the way up through to their breeding grounds in the boreal forests of Canada, then you need action across each of the different parts of the flyway. So that's the flyway's work. I'm going to do two other quick stories. And this one, a bit more straightforward, a bit more classical conservation in a way. So this one's called Conserve Arbors. It's an amazing program that we're doing. It's essentially trying to provide the resources that Indigenous people and local communities need to protect and store those places which are really important for critically endangered species and also congregations of declining migratory birds. And this one is working, and it's working brilliantly. And this rather busy slide is essentially saying, thanks to this partnership, again, of the North American BirdLife partners, but also this Red Lat community, which is this fine environmental funder network across Latin America, and bolstered by the Canadian government and the Bezos Earth Fund, we've now mobilised, I think about 10 million or so, to support, and the figures here, we've helped to create we're aiming to create more than 100 protected areas through the work that's been taking place to protect more than 1.7 million hectares, and then loads of species are benefiting. And of course, some of the species are pretty spectacular. So, I don't know, I saw my first Cerulean warbler last year. Who has seen a Cerulean warbler? They will be there if you have. It is the most stunning warbler, and you are so pleased to see that. But I have no idea if you've seen the Andean eagle, or the parakeet, or the bottle curassow, or the plate-billed mountain toucan. But there's some fabulous birds as well as the migrants, which have been protected. And all of this is helping each of these countries contribute to their global commitment of trying to get 30% of land and fresh water well protected by 2030. So it's a granting program, and it's delivering at scale. And having started in the Andes, we're now moving to Central America. We're hopefully going to be able to roll it out in Brazil, and then we're even talking about rolling it out in Africa. So it's one of those projects which hopefully will really snowball. And then I thought my final one, I just sort of focus on bobbling. I mean, I've only ever seen bobbling once, but I know that in your state, it's in a bit of trouble because of grassland declines, and I thought I'd just sort of tell the story about the contribution that we're making a little bit with this one for BirdLife. So the stats at the top, if you go onto BirdLife data zone, and everything you want to know about birds and their conservation, you can go there, you can type in your favourite species, type in your favourite country, type in your favourite site or flyway, and you'll get information about their conservation. BirdLife data zone. And this one just is basically showing that bobboling's clearly in trouble. And I've just ringed the little citation there about why is it, in trouble. And of course it's because of the destruction of grassland, real pressure of conversion of their native grasslands to arable and to other forms of infrastructure. And so the thing that we're trying to do across the whole of its range is try and protect those grasslands. So in the Pampas, southern cone grasslands of South America, it's an incredibly important area for grassland species, including bobbling, but it's really unprotected. So the stats here is 75 million hectares across 4 countries, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil and Argentina. There are 96 important bird areas or key biodiversity areas, i.e. the most important areas on the planet, 96 of them there, but less than 0.5% of of those important areas are covered. And so at the moment, we are really struggling to try and get new protected areas in that part of the world. So what the team have done is they forged an alliance with the farming community of the Southern Crane Grasslands, essentially the cattle ranchers, and we've been trying to encourage them to farm in a way which is really keeping the grasslands well maintained by the livestock at appropriate densities, and so that essentially they're still on the land, not being converted to arable, and then we're encouraging them to market their produce as wildlife-friendly beef. And we're calling this initiative Alianza del Pastizal. It's been going on for nearly 20 years. And again, some lovely statistics. So we now have several. By the way, this image is a photoshopped image. I apologise, because you can probably see that some of the birds are not quite as big as they look on that slide. But we've now got 785 producers, again, extensively managing and grazing over 1 million hectares. And they're protecting the birds that need those grasslands. And in Brazil alone, you can see that it's 355 producers, and it is really changing the culture. They're very united. They've got their next big conference coming up in June, and they're really proud about the work that they're doing, saving the grassland and saving the birds. And they get a little stamp of approval, which they can use on their beef. So I've given you 3 stories. There are many, many more stories in the conservation world. I just wanted to share them because I think that what they do is they give cause for hope and optimism. And for me, when I mentioned that earlier, hope is all about having fantastic action plans, good programs, but also the optimism comes from the fact that you've actually seen the evidence that it's possible to improve the natural world. So it's not blind optimism, it's not blind hope, it's based on evidence of conservation success. And we are going to be coming together as a global community. We get together once every 4 years at our next global partnership meeting, which is taking place in Nairobi, and we're going to use the opportunity to recommit to the BirdLife creed, the solidarity that we share, but also to celebrate the successes we've had and just map out the agenda for the next few years. Because one of the wonderful things about BirdLife is you can feel quite lonely at times in conservation, but if you're in together, if you're working together, and if you are together, then it makes you feel as though you can pretty much do anything. I've been using this slide for a while. It seems very apt, given what's been going on with your piping plovers. So I'm glad that sort of ended on that nice note for you here on the lakeside of Lake Michigan. Anyway, thank you very much. And if any of you'd like me to ask me any questions about anything you like, you're more than welcome to do so. Or if you'd just like to have a little conversation afterwards, happy to do so as well. But I'm happy to take any questions. Yes. So I am a son of a biology teacher and a son of an Anglican vicar. So I thought my path was always slightly set to have that sort of slightly puritanical zeal associated with the natural world. And then my mother really just sort of fostered my interest in the natural world. And then I was explaining earlier to a colleague that when I was doing my graduate studies, I was fortunate enough to do some research in the Comores, which is a little archipelago between Madagascar and Mozambique. And that was the first time I saw slash and burn agriculture, and I got interested in that dynamic between local people trying to get the food they need and the impact of the natural world. And then I've been a creature of the NGO world. I joined the RSPB, the Royal Society of Protection of Birds, in 2004, and that's the UK partner, and then I was a director there for 10 years. I was on the Global Council of BirdLife, but then my predecessor said, why don't you come and try and help make BirdLife better? And I love the model because it's all national. Most, I know US is enormous, so you've got loads of local groups, but in many of these countries, they're national and local, and I think they're the most legitimate actors. I love the BirdLife model, and I wanted to make it better. And then I joined the global team in 2021, just in the middle of the pandemic. And then my predecessor, she resigned, and I took over the job, and I'm very lucky to do this job. Anyone else? Any comments or questions? Yes, lady at the back.
Hi, thank you for this. This is a great talk. Thank you.
Let's get that. I mean, I know there's loads of great guidance. There's great guidance, as you probably know, but that's not the question, is it? You wanted to know for grants. Anyone in the room have ideas or someone who they think would know who might be able to help? I was chatting to a guy from the, oh yeah, go on, yeah.
No, I was just going to say you can look and see if you're building for the SPIF district, SPIFF. That's a grant from the city. It's for any kind of building improvements. And there's different SPIFs open up at different times of the year. So you just have to come around and apply for one. And then we just,
I think there was a gentleman there.
Yeah, I was interested in the slide you showed, the pressure slide with the
Oh, yeah.
circles and agriculture and crops being the biggest pressure points. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that particular pressure.
Yeah, so I think agricultural systems around the world, obviously through amazing technology, we've been able to provide an enormous amount of food, but essentially what's happened is a combination of the intensity of the farming practices on existing agricultural land, and then it's the expansion, particularly in places in the tropics, which have been clearing forests, for example, to provide food. So I was thinking, I haven't seen a bald eagle for quite a long time. I saw one just last week in Washington. Of course, you guys have got bald eagle bouncing back with 3 new nesting pairs, I think, around the lake. And I've just reminded myself of the story of the bald eagle, which got down to 417 breeding pairs in the 1960s, and then the population collapsed because of the use of DDT, this pesticide. But of course, once that was banned, it took about a decade to do so. It bounced back. So but the reason I mention that is A, because you can turn things around, but also because still the widespread use of pesticides, some of the worst ones at the moment, neonicotinoids, they're causing a real problem with some of the invertebrate populations, which are then having an impact on the feed chain, and the birds aren't getting the food that they need. And then there's also just an enormous amount of build-up of nutrients, which is causing problems, and particularly in some of our waterways. So it's a combination of intensifying existing agriculture, expanding into new areas, which of course we're trying to stop for some of the grasslands. It's complicated because there's a tension between obviously feeding the world and obviously making sure there's enough space for nature. And I think, however, there is enough evidence that shows it is possible to farm profitably and to deliver really impressive yield and also have nature. I think it's possible to have both. There's raging debates around that, and there are many strong advocates for different forms of farming from within the farming community, and often they're the best ambassadors for that.
Typically, to get policy change, the motivation is economic, and for businesses or governments to change policy, it has to be an economic reason. I think you mentioned that once there was a study, it was biodiversity affecting, potentially being a threat to the economy. Could you give a few examples on that?
Yeah, so pretty much all the things that we rely on, whether it's food, whether it's clean water, whether it's protection from flooding, whether it's stabilised climate, whether it's inspiration, recreation, whatever it might be, a lot of that will depend on the natural world. So most of the values that the natural world offers through these services, so-called ecosystem services, they're not normally captured by traditional economics. So essentially they're valued as zero, so they're easily traded away. And there's been all sorts of efforts to try and put nature on the balance sheet, to be able to say alongside your traditional economic assets, you should also be looking at your natural assets. And they should also be a sign of business performance. Of course, that has not been happening. Now, within the Global Biodiversity Framework, that big agreement which was struck 4 years ago, there is an encouragement, it's not an obligation, on companies to disclose their impact on nature. And of course, for those companies which are reliant on a stable climate to be able to grow climate-sensitive crops like coffee, like cocoa, things like that, then they see material risk to their supply chain, they see material risk to their business model. So they're the ones who are moving faster to understand their impacts and then to try and work out how do they do something differently. So you're absolutely right. Most most politicians are focused solely on jobs and economy. However, your much beleaguered US Fish and Wildlife Service produces every few years this incredible study looking at the economic value of birds and bird watching, and it has shown that the birds and bird watching, the tourism and associated economic associated with that is generating something like $267 billion every year to the US economy, which is staggering. It is billions. I would encourage you to read that report. So that can sometimes be quite powerful, but then if you can value the benefits of flood protection, sea defense, of clean water, those sort of things, and then you might be able to make the case for action. I don't think it works personally to monetize individual species because I think in the end, I think that's, some economists do try. I think that's about sort of how we act as good stewards. You have to set targets, I believe, to try and drive their recovery. But I think the economic arguments are getting stronger. Anyone else? Yes.
There's a small but growing body of research that shows that male and female birds across the portions of the range, especially in their wintering range, tends to differ, and therefore the implications for conserving the species as a whole might involve more than one strategy in order to account for both the males and the females of the species. Are you seeing that emerge in other places in the world as well, and if that's informing certain conservation strategies?
I'd have to check with my guys, actually. I haven't heard that coming up from my team. However, I was chatting to Pete Mara from Georgetown University, who was one of the guys behind the big 3 billion lost birds report. And he was saying that our understanding is just growing enormously in this area, and these sort of subtle changes are affecting species. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me, but it's not something that we are, it's not something that's sort of bubbling up for us within our team. But you're absolutely right that you sort of need to know what's going on, what the problem is, before you can actually sort of target the solutions. And that's why I think that diagnostic research, if things are shifting, still remains incredibly important, because you could be pointing your solutions in the wrong direction. So I better go and find out more about that sort of differential impact on gender. Yeah. Yes.
What can we do as individuals, bird watchers, what can we do to help?
So, one of the things about birding is, I think it's just great fun, and we had a wonderful walk earlier, and I think that it creates a lovely environment where you're walking and talking and birding at the same time, so that sense of community, which I think is just really important for all of us. So keep on doing that. But I think that, obviously everyone is a consumer, and everyone actually, if they're over the age of 18, have a chance to cast their vote. And I think that what you consume, how you behave as a consumer, and how you cast your vote, and how you act as a good citizen really matters. I know I'm standing in a country which is deeply divided at the moment. I live in a country which is really deeply divided, and it sometimes feels quite hard to work out how on earth do we get cut through with some of these, with politicians. But I like the fact that here in this country you have a nature is non-partisan movement which is growing, and I think that I still believe that there is enough that brings us together in terms of shared love of nature, which potentially can break down some of these enormous silos, but consume well and vote well. Anyone else? Yes. This is another difficult one, isn't it? I'm going to be on the hotline to Stu, our chief scientist, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble.
I threw you a curveball, so I'll throw you an easy one now.
Yeah.
What's your spark bird, the bird that got you into birding?
Northern Lapwing.
So it's northern lapwing. Southern lapwing, I think, is a sort of raucous bird, but the northern lapwing is very beautiful. It's a bird of wet grasslands. It's got lovely sort of two little tufts on its head, and it's got a lovely sort of clap winging action, particularly during the courtship display, and it's a gorgeous bird. And it was the first bird I properly saw through binoculars. So I think that, you know, when you're young, you know, some people get the bug very early and they've got people who can encourage them to see. I was actually just mainly looking at ponds and things with my mother, but it was when I first properly saw a bird through binoculars where I saw the beauty of a northern lapwing, and then away we went. What about yours? What was yours?
It was a mallard.
It was a mallard. There we go. That's okay. That's okay. But yeah, no, I think there's yeah. I mean, everyone will have their own spot with it. Yeah. Anyone else? If not, then just thanks very much for listening, and it's really thanks again to Chicago Ornithological Society for hosting this evening. And I'm happy to stick around if you want to carry on chatting.